Today we're going to be looking at why a systems audit is invaluable. And I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of their schedule to attend this today. My name is Chris Garner. I'm the Vice President of Technical Services at Surety CNC Solutions. And I've been doing CNC for about 13 years. Administration, consultation. I worked in-house for a number of years. I've traveled around doing audits, upgrades, installs. I've done pretty much all the web servers, all the databases, and all the platforms. And I believe that an audit is invaluable, and explain to you why I believe it is. So let's just jump right into this. So today we're going to go over why is the system audit helpful? Why is it needed? What's going to go into doing one? What are you going to learn from us doing a system audit? How does it help your CNC out? Is he going to get any value out of the system audit? And what exactly is this going to do to make your system better? Well, why is it helpful? Well, it's going to provide a visual map of your system. It's going to give you a visual map of what each server does and provide details on the resources of each server. Now, that being said, something like this Visio document is a great thing for everybody to have on their desk. You bring them to meetings, you're talking about the system, somebody asks you about server A and it's an enterprise server and maybe it's running Vertex, and the other person you're talking to, they just, they don't get it, they don't understand that concept. But when you look at an architecture map, you can kind of see, all right, well, that's the enterprise server. It looks like it's handling our logic functions, and it's got our database on it too. So you start getting some understanding of what this person's talking about. And then maybe they go, well, we had an issue with our Jazz server. And you're thinking, well, what's the Jazz server? Is that the web server he's talking about? And you can kind of quickly look at a visual map and you can say, yeah, that is the web server and it's for production. And you can kind of see that that's what the end users are going to get them to the database on the logic server. So it just kind of makes sense of everything. Why is this needed? Why do you have to do this? Well, this should actually be done annually. A lot of companies don't do it annually. They'll put it off. Maybe they'll do it one time after they have their system installed, or maybe a year after they have their system installed. But shortly after go live, it should be done. And it's going to make sure that you're up to date, because a lot of things change between when you install a software and when you go live with the software. So this is going to make sure you're up to date with all the minimum technical requirements. Those are going to change. Every 3 to 6 months, there may be a change in there. So this lets you know that, yeah, I've got everything that's needed to go forward with the system. It's looking good. Everything's stable. And going through that, you're just double checking everything, making sure nothing's changed, as I said. So what goes into doing one of these? Well, every server is going to be logged into. All the settings are captured and checked. Your JDE logging is going to be looked at. Your INI files are going to be looked at. We're going to look at web server logs. We're going to look at server manager and how that's configured. Look at the database, what it's doing, if there's bottlenecks in there. Create that visual map we were talking about. Once all this information is gathered, then we're going to take all that. We're going to go to the Oracle website. We're going to look at all the minimum technical requirements, compare all that, make sure everything is up to snuff and it's good to go. We're going to look at best practices per Oracle. How do they say that your web server should be running? What do they say should be the optimal amount of resources? But then on top of that, we're going to look at what other companies are doing. Make sure that you're in line with really what best practices are. So what are you going to learn from something like this? Well, typically, there's 15 to 40 optimizations that come up when one of these are done. We look at all the best practices, like I said, all the MTRs, and it just provides you with that peace of mind. All the ins and outs of your system, all the settings that can be changed, and then all the things that you should change to make it better. How is this going to help your CNCs? Well, how many times have you walked into your CNC's office and asked them a question about a particular server or process? Or how many times has he walked into somebody else and said, hey, I'm looking at the, such and such application or Vertex for payroll, and this doesn't look right, and and the other person just kind of has a blank look on their face. They don't know what's going on. Well, they have this visual document. They just glance up at that, and it kind of puts you both on the same page. You can see what both of you are talking about. It gets the answers out quickly, gets the conversation going quickly. There's not a whole lot of explanation that needs to go on. It kind of takes the black box out of CNC, at least on the surface. And it's a lot easier to troubleshoot an issue if you can visualize what the processes are actually doing. You're looking at the system map, you're saying, well, A is going to B, B is going to C. You're just connecting the dots and you can see what's going on. You can see where there's breakdowns, visually in your mind, and you know what to check. And again, it's one-stop shopping. It has all your current settings, all your optimizations. And I know we keep coming back to that, but that's important. It's got everything in there. All right, so the big question, does this make your system better? Yeah, absolutely, it makes it better. There's going to be stability suggestions, speed suggestions. Again, we look at all the MTRs, make sure you're on the right versions. If you're on an older version, we tell you what version you should be at. If you're on the right version, we tell you what that version is, that you're there, and per such and such MTR from Oracle or document ID, that's the correct one you need to have. And depending on where you're at, it could potentially make it much faster, much better than what you currently have. All right, let's open this up for a few questions. All right, how long does an audit take? Well, typically an audit's going to take anywhere from 20 to 40 hours, depending on the complexity of your system. If you're a small company, 100 users, you get the basic enterprise server, database, maybe you have a logic server in the mix, and your deployment server, you got a couple of web servers. Well, that's probably going to be more on the 20-hour side. But if you're a complex installation, you have multiple web servers that are all fault tolerant, with multiple JVMs, and you've got 2 or 3 logic servers, and maybe you got 2 database servers, everything's segmented between production, non-production, you got lots of third-party software. The more complex it is, the more time it's going to take. So that situation, that scenario, that's really more of a 40-hour audit there. But typically, it's a week or less. We take a look at what you have, and we get the audit out to you. All right, next question here. Isn't this just a CNC thing? No, as I was saying before, absolutely not. That visual map that's there, that's a good thing for everybody to have on their desk. Like I said, it puts everybody on the same page. You're all talking about the same thing. It takes the confusion out of the loop. You have the conversation, you point to what's on there, everybody's starting on the, like I said, they're on the same page, everyone's talking about the same thing. So it's a great thing for everyone to have, not just the CNC people. And there's many companies where I went to that the directors, they have their systems map right there in front of them, right on top, right plugged in on their board on top of their desk. They see everything you're talking to them, they're glancing over to see what you're, what you're referring to. All right, next question. Do you need to be on site to perform this? No, this can all be done remote. But, it's probably a good idea to have somebody come on site, but, like I said, you don't have to. Maybe you want to interact with this person, maybe you want this person to meet the staff. Maybe you want this person, in some meetings to answer questions from your user group or your power users, that may be off the subject of the audit. So it's a good idea usually to bring them on there, but is it required? No. Not at all. You can do this remote and, prepare the document and present it to everybody remote as well. All right, let's see, another question here. Does this cover Unix? Yeah, it covers Unix. It's going to cover everything. Doesn't matter if you're Oracle, if you're SQL, Microsoft SQL Server, if you're AS400. It's a good thing to have. It's going to cover everything, all the OSs, all the databases, and all the different flavors of web servers as well. Whether it be WebSphere, OAS, or WebLogic, it's going to be covered. All right, what is a typical optimization? Well, one of the things I like to talk about is the call object kernels, because normally that's delivered out of box for the enterprise server, with around 20 call object kernels. And that's usually pretty good when you're implementing the software. That's a good number to have. But by the time you hit go live, if you're a medium-sized company, you've added users, maybe you have 30, 40 users now, well, those 20 call object kernels are going to be stressed out servicing your web server. to take care of all the additional users you've had, after go live. So that's probably something they call object kernels that should be looked at just prior to go live. That's just happened to be an example I use, but just after go live, this whole audit is something you probably want to go through to make sure whatever changes you've made just prior to go live are still valid just after go live. And then, like I said, annually after that, you want to have one of these to make sure you're up to date with all your settings, minimum technical requirements, and what have you. All right, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So with that, I'm going to close this. Again, if anyone wants to contact me, I can be easily reached at chrisgarner@suretycnc.com. And I would love to answer any questions any of you have. Thank you.